Joins us. He is with the Show Me Institute. Good morning, Patrick Toohey.
Good morning. How are you?
You ever going to join us here in studio, or are you still small-timing us?
Maybe someday when I'm slumming it out in St. Louis, I'll come in.
All right. No, I don't want you to small-time us too bad. All right, from a secured bunker, Patrick Toohey is with us, Director of Municipal Policy at the Show Me Institute. What's going on with TIFs that we should know about? Is there a new study out?
Oh, yeah, there is actually, and we've been speaking to you and your listeners for years about blight. You know, people understand that the way the TIF laws are written, almost anything can be blighted, and they'll use any definition to just get public subsidies for private development.
Right.
But a new study we're putting out this week by Bill Lester, and Bill is from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He took several years' worth of data in St. Louis and Kansas City to look at the economic development repercussions of TIF. And he found that there are none. Areas in the aggregate, areas that don't receive subsidy grow just as fast as areas that do. And in fact, in St. Louis, it appears that areas that receive TIF actually grow more slowly than areas that don't.
How can that be? How can that be? Because a TIF brings a whole bunch of redevelopment to a certain area, which will then spur other economic development. How can that be?
Well, you're absolutely right. That is the rhetoric. But what happens is developers don't want to put TIF in areas that are economically challenged, right? It's a greater risk for them. And because they don't have to, because St. Louis and Kansas City allows them to put TIF anywhere, then they do. And of course, what you see is they're basically developing in areas that are already vibrant, and if they didn't develop, if they didn't TIF, those areas would still be vibrant, and so it ends up being a wash. You might still be able to argue that, you know, Patrick, TIF is a worthwhile endeavor to invest in declining neighborhoods, and I would argue that's true, but the problem is because we put it everywhere, the data doesn't show any benefit.
So what you're saying is, over all these 30 years of TIF, look at how many TIFs have gone into North City.
That's right. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very small number.
Right.
And of course, the developers want to look. Developers aren't fools. Investors aren't fools. They want to put their money where it's going to be successful, and who can blame them? The fool here is the taxpayer, because we give them money to do what they would be doing anyway.
Actually, the fool is not the taxpayer. The fool is the elected official.
Well,
The taxpayer keeps trying to get this changed, and they keep electing people to go to their regional governments and represent them, and the elected officials don't do what they said they're going to do.
Well, I think that's true. And to your point, this is what's exciting to me about this issue, is it's an opportunity in Kansas City and St. Louis and around the state for activists that are traditionally conservative and activists that are traditionally liberal to work together. Because there are groups in the inner city, in both cities, that on the left, who are tired of seeing tax dollars diverted away from schools and basic services given to developers who frankly don't need the money.
It is interesting that over the last 20 years, that's the only thing liberals and conservatives agree on, and that's the only thing they won't change.
You know, that's true. This is classic. It's not left versus right. It's just perhaps, as you said, elected versus unelected, or, you know, elite versus taxpayer.
You know, the other thing about TIF that is the dirty little secret. It's the what do they call that? The but for clause, right?
That's right.
Explain that to people, because that is a great talking point that should be blasted out of the water.
So this paper that we're releasing this week talks exactly about that. So the but-for analysis basically says that the developer has to come to the city in order to get a subsidy and say, hey, nobody would develop here but for a public subsidy, right? So if you guys don't invest, nobody's going to. Now, the legal standards in Missouri statute are pretty weak on this, and oftentimes the only evidence to support the but-for analysis, and this is going to make you crazy, it's an affidavit from the developer, him or herself, saying, yeah, I won't develop without a subsidy. That's basically it. Imagine your child coming to you and saying, you know, I need some money, and you say, are you sure? And they say yes, and you're like, okay, well, that's all the evidence I need. I mean, of course these people have every incentive to ask for subsidies. And so when Bill Lester looks at this over 20 years, 30 years, and sees that, again, in the aggregate, areas without TIF are growing just as fast, you say that there is no but-for analysis. It's meaningless. And it's not just Missouri, by the way. This is true in Chicago and most every other state that has done these studies. Because TIF is given out so easily, the numbers don't show that it provides any benefit.
And I mean, all you have to do is look at, somebody should do an overlay of the map of, where the blighted areas are and where the rich areas are and who got the TIFs and where the TIFs go, right? Because if you're talking about helping economically depressed areas, why would you put a TIF in Chesterfield Valley and not in North St. Louis?
Oh, you're exactly right. And we've got maps in this report. And, in North County, you'll see very, very few, if any. But the Central West End is glowing with them, and all up and down Washington Avenue. And it's because these big developers that have the pockets to afford lobbyists, who have relationships with city council, they're able to get the subsidies, whereas small businesses that are struggling and placing themselves in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods don't have that kind of resource. They're busy just trying to provide a product and make salary.
Patrick Tuohy, where can we read more about this study?
If you go to the showmeinstitute.org and look for publications, you'll see this right at the top. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patrick. You're always welcome here.